Hello Gators, this is 1-7 Writing Proofs Day 2. Today's objective is to prove 4 theorems. This is our first theorem. It's called the congruent supplements theorem. It says if two angles are supplementary to congruent angles or the same angle, then they are congruent. Let's go ahead and go through the 2-column process. So we have two angles that are supplementary to the same angle. So in this situation, it looks like angle 1 is supplementary to angle 2, and at the same time, angle 3 is supplementary to angle 2. So that's where we're getting supplementary to the same angle. All right, we are given this information, so we write given for the reason. Now, since both of these statements are equal to 180, they must be equal to each other. So measure of angle 1 plus measure of angle 2 is equal to the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 2. And that is going to be substitution. Since they're both equal to 180, they're equal to each other. All right, now I'd like to take away angle 2 from both sides. So if I take away, if I take away angle 2 from this side and angle 2 from this side, I'll have angle 1, measure of angle 1 equal to measure of angle 3, and that's called the subtraction property. And the theorem says I need to be proving that the angles are congruent. I have them equal, and now to get them congruent, I'm going to go from equal to congruent. And that reason is definition of congruent angles. Whenever angles have the same measure, then they must be congruent. Let's go through the next theorem. The next theorem says if two angles are complementary to congruent angles or the same angle, then they are congruent. So really pretty similar to what we just did a few minutes ago, but now it's adding up to 90 degrees. So this is given. And since they both equal 90, they equal each other. And that reason is, like before, substitution. I'm going to subtract measure of angle 2 on both sides, so that I'll be left with measure of angle 1 and measure of angle 3 because I went through a subtraction process. Now what I'm trying to prove is that angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. I have equals, so I just change it to congruent, and just like before, that's definition of congruent angles. If angles are equal in measure, then they are congruent. Next theorem, all right angles are congruent. So if you have a right angle, they will be congruent to each other. Let's go ahead and prove that. So we have, number 1, we have angle A is a right angle, and we have angle B is a right angle, and that is given. Now, what I know about a right angle is that its measure is equal to 90. And that comes from the definition of right angle. Since I have a right angle, it has to have a measure of 90 degrees. Now they both equal 90, so they must equal each other. And that's called substitution. Now what I want to prove is that the angles are congruent. I have them equal to each other. So I just go one more step, and now I know that they are congruent. Definition of congruent angles. This is our last theorem. It says if two angles are congruent and supplementary, then each is 90 degrees. So they're congruent, and they have to both add up to 180 degrees, so they must be right angles. Let's go ahead and start. We're going to start with a given. And I know that when two angles are congruent, they must be equal to each other. So I'm going to write that. And that reason is definition of congruent angles. I saw that they were congruent, so I know that they're measure. Now I'm going to actually take this away and write its substitute. So I'm going to have measure of angle 1 plus measure of angle 1 equals 180. And I can also do the same thing with this one. I can substitute, instead of putting angle 1, I could put angle 2. So measure of angle 2 plus measure of angle 2 equals 180. Both of those steps, the reason is the same, substitution. All right, and now I'm going to rewrite the black line, and I'm going to say 2 times the measure of angle 1 equals 180, and I'm going to rewrite that other line, 2 times the measure of angle 1 equals 180, and that reason is simplify. All I'm doing is writing it a little differently. Now I'm going to divide both sides by 2, so the measure of angle 1 will be equal to 90, and if I divide both of these by 2, I'll have the measure of angle, see, this should have been a 2 here for the second one. Measure of angle 2 is equal to 90. And that's called the division property. I just divided both sides by 2. Now I'm trying to prove that the angles are right angles. So I got them to be 90 degrees. So I can say angle 1 and angle 2 are right angles. And that comes from the definition of right angle. That's what right angles are, 90 degrees. And that's our last proof.